Was the 2008 housing crisis actually Bill Clinton's fault? And did George Bush actually put policies in place to clean up Bill Clinton's housing crisis? And did Obama just ride on Bush's recovery plan? First of all, please remember that everything discussed in this video is 100% fact-based and unbiased. And let's also remember that things are generally more complicated than they first seem. And for all of the freedom of speech people who are about to see this political video and say, hey, shut up, stick to the stock market. Let's not forget that the 2008 housing crisis led to one of the worst stock market downturns in history. During this time, the S&P 500 dropped around 57% and the Dow Jones dropped around 53%. So these policies all impacted the stock market. All right, Bill Clinton, two-term president from 1993 to 2001, and a big part of his agenda was to make housing affordable for lower and middle-income families all across America. He expanded something called the Community Reinvestment Act, which encouraged banks to give out loans to people who were lower class. This is great news. Underserved communities can now have the ability to buy a home. But critics say that these policies allowed for people with really shitty credit the ability to be able to get mortgages for houses that they really maybe couldn't afford. Clinton also oversaw the deregulation of something called Glass-Steagall, which kept commercial and investment banking separate. And believe me, we're going to definitely come back to this later on in the video, but it was part of the reason that we started to see all these subprime mortgages. Now, the 2008 housing crisis was a mix of several factors. So we've talked about Clinton, now let's talk about Bush. Bush also wanted to make home ownership affordable. Subprime loans were given out to people who were very high risk. They had higher interest rates, and what a lot of people didn't realize was the interest rates were adjustable, meaning that they could get bigger over time. This was something that was not conveyed to people when they went in to sign up for these mortgages. They had no idea. They didn't know anything about this, and nobody was telling them. People were kind of baited in by these low rates, which when they increased, led to a rise in foreclosures. And Bush also favored deregulation. Financial institutions were being very, very sneaky here. Not only were they giving out loans that they knew people couldn't afford and weren't explaining things like adjustable rate mortgages, but they were also bundling these mortgages into something called mortgage-backed securities. And there was no oversight. The SEC wasn't watching. But the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Secretary were watching, and they gave Bush and his administration a lot of warnings, which the Bush administration ignored. Under Bush, we also saw tax cuts, lower interest rates, which fueled demand for housing. We also saw people investing in real estate, flipping real estate, people who bought homes that they couldn't afford. And this leads us all to the banks. Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Goldman Sachs, AIG, these are all names that people are very familiar with because of the housing crisis, and they were all doing shady stuff, like giving out subprime loans, bundling these mortgage-backed securities. We'll get a little bit more into this in a little bit in the video, but they called these investments very safe, which they knew they weren't, and the banks took on massive debt to keep financing this shady behavior. Uh-oh. And the Bush administration supported initiatives to make housing more attainable for average Americans, which meant that banks took advantage of subprime mortgages. You're getting the picture here now, right? This isn't just one particular thing that caused all of this. And remember those mortgage-backed securities that were called very safe? Moody's, Fitch, Standard & Poor's, these are all credit agencies, and they gave these investment vehicles AAA safety ratings. If you think you're getting a AAA rated investment, you think it's very, very safe. It turns out that these were very not safe. And you also have lenders like Countrywide, Washington Mutual, and Ameriquest, who are all giving out these loans and not explaining to people who didn't know and weren't educated on stuff like this what adjustable rate mortgages were really all about. It was kind of like a bait and switch, right? They lure them in. Oh yeah, look, very low interest rates. Some people are just going to blame Bill Clinton and say, hey, you oversaw the repeal of Glass-Steagall. This is your fault. But just because regulations have been taken away doesn't give the right to banks to do stuff that they know is shady. Banks are still responsible for ensuring that their products are safe and for assessing risk. Banks have resources. They have risk management tools. They're able to look at this stuff and go, and instead of being cautious, they were like, oh, nobody's watching. Let's just do all kinds of stuff. Banks exploited the lack of oversight for profit. They knew they were offering subprime rates to people that couldn't afford them. They knew claiming these mortgage-backed securities were safe, even though they weren't. And they created complex derivatives and obscured the truth from people like us, their own clients. Banks knew about red flags, they knew about all the warnings, and they chose to still ignore it. For the money. Banks also realized that they had suddenly become too big to fail. They didn't care about you, they didn't care about me, they didn't care about your investments, they didn't give a shit about anything other than themselves and the money. People love to point to Bill Clinton and say it was his fault, because wouldn't it be nice if it was always just as easy as it was all this one guy's fault, when in the reality, it's way more complex than that. In fact, internal messages at all these firms, Citigroup, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, all were doing these risk profiles, and they were all flashing warning signs. This was potentially catastrophic, and they knew it, and they saw it, and they ignored it for the profit. Now, to circle all the way back to the beginning with your comment about how Obama should actually thank Bush, let's talk about Obama for just a little bit. I know this video is getting pretty long. Obama did a few things to clean up this mess. One was that he created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I think I got it. 2, he implemented something called the Volcker Rule, which would prevent banks from taking on too much risk. Obama also increased oversight to financial institutions, making something called stress tests part of their yearly routine, where banks would see if they had enough capital to withstand economic downturns. Obama enforced strict regulations on mortgage lending. Obama regulated the derivatives market. And Obama implemented some conditions for government bailouts. In other words, if you want a government bailout, you cannot do too many risky things. In a lot of ways, Obama's policies created a safer and more stable financial system. Oh, and by the way, when Trump got elected, he rolled back a lot of this. All right, so now you know that it's usually way more complicated than it's that guy's fault. If you learned something, or you thought this video was helpful, or you want to learn how to invest and live below your means, that's normally what I talk about on this channel, it would mean a lot if you smash that follow. Thanks for watching. See you later.